Okay, cool. So welcome everybody to the Daily Evolver monthly gathering where we look at the world through an integral lens in real time. And that's so much fun. And I'm Jeff Salzman, and here we are at the Boulder Integral Center. And it's December something, 2nd, 3rd, 2012. And I'm here tonight with Mark Michael Lewis, who is here from...
I like this person.
here from California to talk a little politics and worldview and all of that good stuff. And so I just ask you, Mark, to say hello and introduce yourself and say how it is you find yourself here.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Politics is important to me. I really care about it. The idea of how we relate to one another, both individually, one-on-one, and as groups, and especially as groups acting through other people. This dimension of politics. In the Greeks, they broke it down into, let's say, 5 major categories of life and philosophy. There was reality, what is, ontology, metaphysics. What is this stuff? And the Greeks had epistemology, which you could say is, how do we know? How does the human mind work? What's rationality, logic? How understanding, knowledge? And then they had, you could say, axiology, or the study of values. Why do we care? Who cares? And why do we care? And they tend to break that down into morality, what's good, how do you act well, and then politics, how do you act with other people? And the 5th is aesthetics, what's beautiful. What do you realize into, what becomes? And so this fundamental understanding of human being, if you're going to create a good life, how do you do it? Through politics. How do you interact with other people? And I'm fortunate, I got to hang out with Brian Baer and Decker Kunoff about, 12 years ago. And in the process, I got introduced into the Integral Center, part of the community. Got introduced back to Ken Wilber by my priest in 1985. And that's a conversation.
Renegade priest.
Renegade priest, Episcopalian.
Yeah.
And so I've been really interested in this subject for really about 23, 24 years. I've been thinking about it seriously, and it's so nice to be in a context where you can actually speak serious thoughts on a topic that so often gets nailed down into the most partisan sound bites that can catch someone's attention for just long enough to influence the next vote. And it's something that's so important, and it gets so lost in the partisan government political fight that it's really nice to be in a context where we can talk about real stuff, what really matters.
Yeah, I mean, from an integral perspective, we're trying to find the bigger patterns and find the principles. And I think you actually articulated it very well. It's like, how do we live together? It's the lower left, to use Wilber's aqua model. I mean, it's all 4 quadrants, but it's about how do we organize? How do we make rules? Do we make rules? Where do we make rules? And that's been an ever-evolving story, from tribal to feudal and being a serf, to this great awakening in the Enlightenment, that actually there's a sovereignty in me that is inviolable and inalienable and self-evident. And just paradoxically, so beautifully and eloquently stated by Thomas Jefferson, the slave owner who never freed his slaves, even at the end. Just the paradox, just the emergence that evolution, while beautiful and good and true, is not pretty. And that, we have history to prove that, right?
Yeah,
So-
there aren't any solutions or any utopias.
Yeah,
There's only trade-offs. There's only some things are better than other things.
yeah,
Right? You move to, I think about Thomas Jefferson, moving into, for the first time, a legal system that recognized the sovereignty of the individual
yeah.
and gave the individual rights.
Stunning.
Right? When you compare that to what came before, it's unique in human history in a way that hasn't happened before.
Right.
It's an incredible growth forward up the spiral, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah. And yet, once you're at this next level, there's still so many things that need to be handled, right? Slaves, women,
Right.
race,
Mm-hmm.
culture, still yet to be figured out, and we're still figuring that part out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let me then just bring it to present-day politics, and we're just going to talk a little bit between ourselves for a few moments here, and then we'll open it up, and we always have a nice, fun time here. So, and we have a microphone for that. So we're going to make it as organized as possible because we have people watching in real time in virtual space, and then of course people who will watch this in archives, and here we are now. So, you know, we're really trying to look at, so what are the principles, and how do we then relate them to our times and our day, and the fiscal cliff, and Obama and Romney, and you know, and you would identify as a libertarian.
Yeah, it's funny. I was advertised as the integral libertarian, which that's not bad. That's not bad as long as you understand that if it's an integral libertarian, there's probably not the common libertarian simplicities. But can I jump off
You
on
bet.
that for a moment?
You bet.
Because I think one of the things you said is, how do we deal with the principles? What are the principles by which we make political decisions? Right? Do we actually know what our principles are? Do we have principles? Or is it just, okay, here's the hot button issue of the day. The Democrats stand here, the Republicans stand here. Which side are you on? Right? There's the old saying that if you have a quarter, there's only so many things you can do. If you have 25 cents, there's only so many things you can do. But if you don't have a quarter, there's an infinite number of things to do. Right? As soon as you start thinking in terms of money, you've circumscribed the sets of choices that you allow yourself. And then it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do with this quarter? And I feel that that's how it is with our political system. It's like you've either got Republican or Democrat, and the only conversation we have is who's right, right? Who are we going to give power to? Versus what are the principles of one party versus the other party? What are my principles? And does this party actually represent my principles? Or is there something outside of either of the parties that I really care about, that really matters? And so in terms of principles, I wanted to make one distinction, offer one thing that's going to be central to everything that I say tonight. And that's the difference between force and persuasion. Right, there's a distinction between using force and persuasion in this level of politics, right, this level of interpersonal interaction. If I'm in relationship with Casey and I want him to do something, I can either use persuasion and try to find something about his values, something that he finds valuable, such that he will willingly do something for and with me. I might offer him money, I might offer him an opportunity to play a particular game, or I can use force. I can threaten him with violence to try to get him to do the thing that I want him to do. Right? And these are fundamentally different ways of dealing on this level of politics. Are we using force or are we using persuasion? Are we speaking that I'm a sovereign and you're a sovereign? Right? I'm me. I have my values, my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences. And you have yours. And therefore, I will stand for me, you stand for you. And I will honor that you can stand for you. right? I want you to win and I want to win. Now let's get together and create something out of what works for you and what works for me, right? And on the level of interpersonal, it's that kind of question. On the level of economics, you could say that's the difference between trade and theft, right? I can say, Casey, you have that hat, I have this jacket, I'll trade you the jacket for the hat. And Casey's only going to do that if he thinks that he's better off having the jacket. And I'm only going to do that if I think I'm better off having the hat. Right? I'm persuaded that it's in my best interest to trade with Casey. Or I can say force, right? Give me your hat, or else I will hurt you, imprison you. I'll use some kind of force against him. Again, this distinction between force and persuasion when it comes to this level of politics.
Okay, may I stop you there
Yes.
and offer some response?
Can I go one more step?
One more step.
Okay, great. The difference between persuasion and force, if you think about it in your own life, has consequences. When you use force in your relationships, it changes the dynamic of the relationship in predictable and unfortunate ways. Right? When you use persuasion, it creates a different kind of relationship. It has a predictable consequence. And so when it comes to how we, you could say, take the highest level, how do we organize ourselves as a society on this political level? We have something called legislation, which is that we create laws. And laws are where persuasion becomes force. Wherever we make a law, we persuade one another about this law, and then that law becomes force. And so all of our laws are embodied force. And so everything in our legal system brings with it all the consequences of using force. If we've agreed to it, then okay, well, we've agreed to the law, and that's the agreements that we have. We set down whatever laws we set down. But when you distinguish between persuasion and force and legislation as the means to make persuasion force, I think that lens, when you combine it with the spiral, you can recognize that the use of force at each level of the spiral, of each level of development, they use force differently and they respond to force differently. They use persuasion differently and they respond to persuasion differently. But this difference between force and persuasion and how we create legislation that turns persuasion into force shows up in predictable patterns at all the levels of the spiral. And the context of politics we're dealing with is how does it show up for the different people in society, the different groups? How are they going to react to our use of force versus persuasion? And how do we use persuasion to get them to authorize the use of force? Right? How do we convince enough people to use force to enact what we think is best against people who don't think that it's best? Otherwise, we wouldn't need to use force against them. Right? When do we decide to use force against other people to mandate that they will do what we want them to do? And that question, where do you use force and where do you use persuasion, and what are the impacts of that? That's what really interests me about the field of politics. And I find the integral model, when you bring that distinction to the integral model, and you look at the various parts of the integral model through that distinction, you notice patterns that are profound in terms of how you want to act politically. Because politics is fundamentally how you engage with the world, how you engage with individuals, how you engage with your community, and how you engage with the monopoly of force that we have in our culture, which is government. Right? How do you impact how government uses force against its citizenry? And if you think about it from that perspective, it brings on a particular level of responsibility about when would you use force against another human being instead of persuasion. If you think about that question, I think it brings on a tremendous level of responsibility, and that's what I would love in the political conversation, is the responsibility of when am I choosing to resort to force because I don't believe persuasion is enough and it's important enough for me to use force.
Yeah. Yeah, right on. Yeah. So let me respond by saying that, first of all, what you present, I think, is actually where we're headed. I think that we will win in the, end, always being a moving target, a world where it's persuasion and not force. And we're building the strata to get there. And that we can even have an argument or even differentiate persuasion from force. Because in a tribal or even in, for a lot of the strata of human history, those wouldn't even be discernible. You know what I mean? In a tribe, you're melded into a whole that you don't even necessarily have a differentiation, an egoic differentiation. And then even in feudal and so forth, there's just the king rules, man.
He who has the gold makes the rules.
Exactly. And this movement into that there's a sovereignty here is, huge progress that just, you can't say enough about it. I mean, it's just an evolutionary achievement of humanity that is so precious that I think it gets reified. And it's hard to reify it because it's so precious. I mean, it's hard to over-reify it in a way. But that it wants to forget that we have this strata of society that we're still rooted in. Or there's just this strata of undifferentiation and just mass movement, just at the fundamental levels, that we haven't really worked our ways through. Do you understand what I'm even talking about? Does anybody?
So, are you saying that the potential of going towards persuasion requires that you're differentiating between force and persuasion, and that
Yes,
as we move up the spiral, we're developing more of a self that's distinct from the lower left values?
I would say that the idea of force and persuasion happens around here.
Okay, in that case, I will challenge you, because what I want to do is, Ken Wilber talks about interior versus exterior, and collective versus individual, or individual versus collective. And he takes these two individual dimensions, and when he puts them together, he creates a quadrant. Right? You can look at anything and say, well, are we dealing with the interior or the exterior? We can look at anything and say, are we dealing with the individual or the collective? Right? Everything tetra arises, as he puts it. I want to say that the difference between force and persuasion is similarly universal when it comes to the realm of politics, how we interact with one another. And that's true on red. Red has a sense for force and persuasion,
No, it's true.
and it's built into it.
You're right.
And amber has it. It just shows up differently
You're right.
at each of those levels. And the way that it shows up is critical, because that determines whether we're going to use force or persuasion in our culture. Are we going to interact with one another by force?
Right.
Or are we going to use persuasion? And I do think that historically, to piggyback on what you said, the American Revolution and the statement that all men, right, all human beings, are created equal. Right? We're obviously not equal in terms of strength or size or anything like that, but we're given the same status. We are equal before the law. We are equal in our sovereignty. And we're going to actually create a social system where we use persuasion to create force, and the force says you will be protected in your person and your property. You have the right to your life. You have the right to your liberty, to your freedom. You have the right to pursue your happiness according to your own conscience. We're going to make that the law. We're going to take persuasion and create laws that say, you are free. If another human being wants to interact with you, they have to use persuasion. They can't use force. It doesn't matter if they're the king. It doesn't matter if they're your political leaders, right? You, as an individual, have rights which cannot be taken away. And we took, like, as you say, as we go up, we get to this orange level where we say, our self is me. I'm myself. I'm not a member of a tribe. I'm not a member of a belief system. I'm me. And I get to live my life according to my conscience. Right? This orange insight that was actually codified into law so that force said, anybody who disagrees with that, anybody, if you want to take my stuff, if you want to threaten me, that's against the law. And our government is there to protect us from one another so that we're free to interact. That is politically, I think, the most extraordinary achievement in human history. To actually make that the law. And that's the root of the American country. That's the root of the American spirit. If we were to reconstitute the American character, it would be as someone who says, I have my rights, you have yours.
So
let's work together to create something by choice, not use force against one another.
So, beautifully put, how would you organize society? What would you say in terms of today's politics, Obama, about, the whole scene? What's your view, and where do you think we ought to be moving? And how?
Yeah, it's a little question.
Yeah, exactly. We'll start with the small stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tough because you get into what would you do? Would you vote for Romney or Obama? Okay, what about the principles underneath? Because both of them have a lot of challenges to me. And as you were saying, in evolution, you don't get to start from wherever you want. You have to start from where you are. Right? Thomas Jefferson didn't get to start in an economy that no longer needed slavery. Right? With the cotton gin, the South made it profitable to have slaves. And so the farms that you slaved said, we're holding on to this. In that context, Thomas Jefferson did what he could. Right? He didn't believe that we could free the black man because it would create havoc in society. He wanted to. He proposed that we send everybody back to Africa, send them all back to Africa. That way they can be free, but they don't. It's impossible for us to integrate. That's what he thought. At the time, that's what he was dealing with, so he did the best he could with what he had. Now, here we are right now. Well, what do we do now? How do we organize society now? That's a good question. I would say the central thing that I would want is for the politicians to be held accountable for their decisions. Right? When a politician creates a policy, they're creating legislation. They're turning persuasion into force. They're saying, do it the way we say, or else we will come after you with police and guns and seize your assets. Right? That's what regulation means. It says, if you want to trade with me, that's not allowed. For example, I have a hurt finger, and because I have a hurt finger, it's hard for me to get insurance because of my pre-existing condition. So I went to the insurance company and I said, well, can't we just create a rider? Can't we just have a rider that says, cover everything but my finger? And if anything goes wrong with my finger, you're not responsible for that. And they said, no, we can't do that. Why not? Well, because it's against the law, right? The insurance company has to cover my finger by law. So I have to pay for, even though my finger is covered by another insurance policy, right? In fact, my current insurance policy can't pay for my finger because that would violate the other contract. I have to pay for them to take on my finger because there's a law in place and I can't make a voluntary transaction with the insurance company. So when we as politicians, when we vote for politicians who are creating laws, we're legislating the use of force. And if you're going to do that, I think there's definitely reasons. There's legitimate cases where you use the use of force, right? You can't hurt another human being. You can't hurt their person. You can't use fraud. There's even good cases you can say you need to protect the water system, right? You could even say providing roads. There's arguments for that. Okay, well, we could argue that case.
In a military.
In a military,
right.
Police system, court system, so that you can have laws.
Right, contracts.
Right, contracts,
yeah.
to avoid fraud.
Yeah, but
police to avoid force.
Net, no. Or how's that handled? Or
well, rather than saying, should we have a safety net or should we not have a safety net? Right, which is, I don't know. Yeah, we should have a safety net. Of course, given the choice between those, it's kind of a brainless thing. The question is, what is the safety net? What does that look like? How do we pay for it? Is it voluntary? Is it government organized? Is it government paid for? Right.
And what do you think? What's your answer?
Well, again, starting from where we are, the government has replaced charities. Go back 100 years, you come into San Francisco and you look in the phone book, and there's literally a dozen pages of charities to support all the different challenges that people had. Because when people are suffering, other people go, they're suffering, let's do something about that, and they create charities. And they were called needs-based charities for the worthy poor. So if someone was an alcoholic and they lost all their stuff, well, they didn't have a lot of charities for that. You actually, all the charities where I look you in the eye and say, you need help, we will help you.
So what happens to the ones who don't look you back in the eye?
Then you don't help them unless you feel a call to help them.
Do we move them off the street as where they're dying, or? It gets abject at a certain level.
It does get abject, and if it gets sufficiently abject, people would step up. So if we take this argument that I'm saying, right now, the government currently handles all kinds of issues. And so if we take away that support...
Well, let's just say that the collective has always handled certain issues, like, dying people on the street.
Right, and the difference is a charity is persuasion, and a government is force. So,
well, the collective, at some point, is it force or persuasion? There's a certain movement
so
total.
when there are laws involved, and if you break the laws, you go to jail, I'm going to call that force.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
I don't have any problem calling that, there's certain behaviors that will be enforced.
So
like taxation for, a safety net that's not voluntary, that is...
like our current system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so when...
And what I'm saying too, Mark, is that, and then we're going to open it up here real quick, but what I'm saying is that there's a place for the, self-responsible imperative. It's really, really, really important. And there's also a dimension of reality that is not voluntary. It never has been. Maybe it will be at some point, but it never has been, and it still isn't, in very fundamental ways that we have to deal with.
That are built into the fabric of life.
Yes,
Human
exactly.
beings are a certain way. We need food.
You could say that, one of the ways that, human beings organized to deal with this was government and safety nets.
Oh,
and
sure.
The collective dealt with it.
Sure. And the question
with
is...
the assumption that all individual units would come along. And this idea that there are individual units, as precious as it is, doesn't revoke the previous strata, which were pre-individual.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think
absolutely. So again, the question: should we have a safety net?
And the answer is, of course.
Yes.
Okay.
Of course.
So we're good on. Why don't we?
And so then the question becomes: when our politicians put systems in place, what are the impact of those systems relative to the results that we want to get. So we want to create a safety net. What do we want that safety net to do? What do we not want that safety net to do? Right? Because there are challenges with having a safety net.
Right.
How do we avoid those challenges? When we create laws, do we measure them? Do we say, okay, the purpose of this law is to change this part of society? And we think it's so important that we collectively are going to get together and use force in order to make it happen. It's that important that if someone disagrees with us, we're going to use force against them because we're that convinced that what we're doing is right. Right? To take that level of responsibility. Okay? When we do that, do we measure the results? Right? Do our politicians say, look, here's the program we did.
Well, no,
and
of course we don't. I mean, you're imposing a rational, which God bless rational, but a rational explanation on a pre-rational strata of here and now.
Isn't that what clear thinking is about? I mean, to
Well,
say, are we trying to find
No, but
a
clear
rational solution
clear
that
thinking-
integrates
Okay, well,
integrates what we're talking about? So in terms of the principle, what I'm saying is that when we use force, if we recognize that we're using force, the thing to do politically, the change I would like to have made, is for us to take seriously, if we're going to use force against someone, is what we're doing working? That should be the number one question of politics. What is the impact? Not what's our rhetoric. Oh, I'm going to create this program and it's going to do this great thing. Yay! Right? It's fantastic. The question is, does it work? Did it get you the results you wanted, or did it create a whole nother set of results, which is actually worse than the problem you were trying to solve?
I'd say it's working pretty well.
Compared to what?
Somebody's idea of what it should be.
Yes. And that, okay, so great. So it's working pretty well. Let's not make any new laws.
No, I mean, working pretty well means making new laws. I mean, it just means
growing
and evolving.
Right, and what I'm saying is we're going to use persuasion to create those laws.
Well, yes.
And when I say, I want you to vote for this policy, you say, why? And then we use persuasion. What I'm saying is that in the process of answering the question, why should we create this law? Should we create
vote
this law?
and we all go that direction.
Right. Okay, great. So I'll take it one level deeper. How many people, I'll ask the question. So how many people think that the Healthcare Act, the Advanced Healthcare Act, is overall a benefit for the United States? If you feel comfortable voting, great. Okay. And how many people don't? Anyone? Okay. Couple of us? Okay. Upon what do you base that? What's the knowledge that you have, that you understand economics, and you understand the healthcare system, and you understand how laws and regulations work? What's your knowledge of the system that has you say that you think it's going to be better?
Let me answer that question.
Yeah.
Because I voted for it.
Mm-hmm.
That it's going to include more people in a system that will support them.
Okay, great. So that's an argument, right? That's a persuasive argument. Well,
And
it's going to include more people.
And let me just continue. And that the pattern I'm looking at is a pattern of continued intelligence brought to create higher standards of living, a better life, just basically our first principles again, Mark. Just a better world. So that everybody's in the game, and it's as good as we can do considering where we are.
Great. So in terms of persuasion, I'm going to restate your argument.
Okay.
Okay. If we get this healthcare law, we'll include more people, and that leads to the intelligence of the human being coming together and all good things. All the things that we really want we'll get if only we get more people covered by this healthcare law. Okay, that's an argument. And it's a pretty compelling argument. If it's right. What if it's wrong? What if putting more people into the system actually causes the system to break down? So that overall, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 30, 50 years down the road, we end up with much worse results. Right? If it's wrong, then that's a very bad argument because it's not true. It's compelling. We get more people in, more health, more intelligence, more development up the spiral, all good things. How can you argue against that? Well, you can ask, is it accurate? Right? Doesn't the accuracy of that argument make all the difference in the world?
Well, to a rationalist it does.
Okay, great. So I'm talking to rational people tonight.
Well, no, and we want to include that for sure. I mean, but the truth is we can't know. I mean, we're
Yeah, think about that. Think about that.
I know, really.
We really don't know.
No,
And
no, it's fucked up.
the part that's really tough is that we vote for a policy that we can't possibly understand. Right?
True.
We don't have enough knowledge to know if this law is going to make the world a better place or a worse place. We don't know. Most of us don't even know basic economics. We don't know the basic dynamics of healthcare. We don't understand how the political sausage-making machine actually works.
Well, and every point of view has its own sort of facts and physics that make sense to them.
And if we take all of that into account, we've got a system right now where people are passionately committed to promoting policies at the point of a gun that they don't understand.
Well, welcome to humanity, man.
Okay, great. So you asked me, what would I love to add into the political conversation? I would love to have that question put into the political conversation. It's like, if you're going to authorize the use of force, take responsibility for it. Measure your results.
Okay.
Does it work? Does it not work? And if you're going to vote for it, if you're going to vote for a politician, which, by the way, how many people think that politicians really understand the economic and social long-term consequences of the laws that they're creating? How many people think that our system is in good hands? That if only we give them enough power, they'll fix it?
I'm going to give it a yes, just for the hell of it.
Well, no. So I am, you could say, libertarians tend to be free market oriented. And free market oriented
Yay, free market.
means free. I mean, that's all it means. It doesn't mean anything else. It simply means that we're free. That if I want to trade with you, I can. And I can trade with you anything I want. And that's persuasion. And I would like a world with more persuasion and less force.
You have it, man. I mean, we're
no. Because starting from where we are.
Well, starting from where we were, we're in persuasion land. I mean, nobody's walking around with clubs. We are unbelievably civilized, and we're just arguing with each other.
Not compared to 100 years ago. Right?
Oh yeah.
If we just go back 100 years, the government did not have the power that it has today. 100 years ago, we did not have a $16 trillion debt.
Operate its ethnocentric
We did not have our financial system collapsing that the government is managing. Right?
Say that again?
100 years ago, we didn't have a financial system that was collapsing that the government was managing. Right? When the government manages things...
We collapse forward. I mean, this is...
Okay. So you can say, I just want to clarify the difference between our position. Okay. One is, hey, we collapse forward. We make choices, and those choices are by definition moving forward. Right? And what I'm saying is that
in the big picture,
when you make choices, and I think that's a legitimate way to look at it.
I mean, it's historically accurate. I mean, it's self-evident.
Yeah, it's
Talk about self-evident.
It's what happens. There was the Dark Ages when civilization really collapsed,
setbacks,
but generally we move forward. We do.
Generally, we do.
We do. And what I'm saying is that at each step of the choice of where we're going to give government the permission to control our lives, we should ask the question, are we better off just doing it ourselves? If you think, and I believe if you study the free market, one of the things you discover is that when people are free to trade, innovation happens better, and every interaction is one of win-win. Because unless I don't win something, I don't enter the transaction. And there's something magical about that. There's something extraordinary about that. Do you mind if I take a question?
No, you
So
bet.
my
I think
question
it's
is,
right
I
on
totally
schedule
get
there.
what you're saying, that we all have very limited
Okay,
information.
let's just pause for a second just to, okay, so welcome. Thank you. Hello.
Thanks. Hello. So I totally agree with what you're saying about that we all have limited information. What I'm curious about is, why do you think a number of people with just as much or just as little information, just as the same amount of limited information, making very local decisions amount to a system that's better in aggregate than when people actually at least try to plan more in the aggregate, i.e. like politics and whatever?
Yeah. I mean, so it's a complex question. Why do I think that it's better if each of us individually makes choices according to our own value system, and the effect of those choices come together in a result, a dynamic, complex, adaptive system, versus having some people have force and implement their plans, or try to implement their plans with other people. And I'll say there's two things about that. One, it's very difficult to get people to do what you want them to do by force. People sneak around the edges, right? We look at our financial system, and it is the most heavily regulated industry in the United States. Second most heavily regulated, medicine, right? Once you start interfering with the system, and you set a rule in place, people can start playing against the rule, and there's nothing to stop them. So once you've got a certain law that says, hey, you can give loans to anybody you want. In fact, we're going to pass laws that say, if you don't give loans to people of low income, we're going to fine you.
That would be okay in your book or not okay?
I think it's not okay or not okay. The question is, what is the result? What is the result of that? And the result in this case was that banks said, okay, I need to give more loans. I'm going to give more loans. I can make profit doing this. You're telling me that I need to do something that's going to make me more profit at virtually zero risk, because we all know the banks are going to get bailed out. They were bailed out in the 70s, they were bailed out in the 80s, they were bailed out in the 90s, and they're going to be bailed out next time. So we can make all this money with virtually no risk. Right? Once you create a law, people leverage the laws. If you don't have the laws, if someone does something weird, you just change your business. You stop working with them. So complex adaptive systems, right? How did you all get here tonight without some commissar telling you that you need to be at the center tonight?
That's actually how we got
Yeah. Right? So yeah,
Hey,
traffic.
Mark, I want to move let's just move to the moment, and then we're going to turn
just
it.
I love
this so we have this, deficit, this spending thingy. What do you think ought to happen in terms of, what ought to be the deal that moves us forward?
So again, the specific deal is there's literally 1 million different values in competition here. We've got, what is it now? Is it 26 lobbyists for every congressman? We're spending approximately $4 million a year in lobbying per congressman. Right, just think about that for a little bit. Right? That we've got lobbyists per congressman spending $4 million a year to influence where the politics are going. Okay, how do you solve that sausage problem? I don't really pretend to know that. I'll ask a deeper question. Do we want to give the government more money and power? Are they using it intelligently? Are we confident that if we give them more power, they will make the situation better than it is now? And I submit that when your government is $16 trillion in debt, that's trillion, $4 billion a day, right? When your government's in that kind of debt, and they've created the kind of chaos that they have created in our financial markets, go boo-boo.
Sorry about my snorting pug, for those of you who wonder if the zombies are invading.
So the question I would rather have asked is, do we want to give more power to the government, and what kind of power do we want to give them? And I think if we ask that question, how are we going to deal with this? Right? How are we going to deal with this problem?
Well, that's my question to you. I mean, it's really, I mean, seriously.
Oh,
do we cut, or how do we cut spending?
Because we
how
have
do
to
we
cut.
raise revenues?
Right.
You know, I mean, I have an answer. I don't know.
Well, so
You do?
I think the easiest thing to do, right, is to say, okay, from this moment on, the government can only grow 1% each year. So we take the current budget as it is, and we grow it 1% every year, and that's the rule. And if we do that, we'll be out of this trouble in 10, 12 years, because the government normally grows 9 to 10% a year. So when we talk about cuts, by the way, when they talk about cuts, we're not talking about we spent $4 trillion this year, we're going to spend $4 trillion next year. We've already built into the system that it's going to increase 8%. So if we cut it down to 7, that's a cut. If we only grow by 7%, that's the cut. Right? The horrible Republican draconian plan still has us growing at more than 3% a year. So if we just said, okay, right now, all of the programs we have in place are useful, there are people dependent on them, the system is locked in that place. Okay, great. So we're just going to grow. Oh, yes.
Brett, could you take her? Maybe she's going to.
If we just grow at 1% a year, our economy will catch up with that in about 10 years, and we can essentially get down to neutral. And then we just say, okay, we're just going to grow from 1% a year. And then we can all agree on how we want to spend that money. Where do we want to create laws?
But what we can't agree on is how we're going to get there in terms of, so do we raise the Medicare? Do we age?
So this is again.
Do we, privatize it?
So if you look at Medicare is on a crash course for disaster. If you actually look at the program, it's unsustainable.
Okay, we get that there's a problem.
Okay, so if you say, well, are we just going to change Medicare? Yeah, we're going to have to change Medicare. The question is how.
Yes.
How are we going to change that?
Right.
Okay. We're going to have to raise taxes. Right? That's going to happen. How it happens?
Wow, from a libertarian? We're going to have to raise taxes?
Well, so this is starting from where we are, dealing with reality. We're going to have to raise taxes. I mean, we're $16 trillion in the hole, headed for 22, right? My guess is that it'll go to 22, 23, that we're not going to really do, I'll give you my unfortunate cynical thing. We as a society don't care enough about this. We don't take it seriously. We just don't. We just say, "Oh, we'll figure it out. The politicians will figure it out," and we're going to kick the can down the road, and we're going to hit 20 trillion. We're going to get downgraded again, and it's going to start to have a real impact. And the government is not going to be able to function the way it is, and then we're going to have to slash. At that point, we're just going to have to slash entire programs.
At the rich people's largesse. That's what we're going to slash
If we take all the money, if we take the top 400. If we take the billionaires and kill them all and take all of their money, right?
No.
If we were to do that, that would last about 3 months. That would last about 3 months of our current federal budget.
All I can tell you is that we have enough capacity to make material wealth for everybody to live a really cool life.
Right. The question is just how.
Exactly.
Yes, and that how is where all the
and
information is.
I mean, in terms of deregulating, freeing, all of that good stuff, I'm really interested in all that.
Deregulation can be just as problematic as regulation.
Well, okay,
right?
let's just stop here.
Okay.
And notice that we've been at it for 50 minutes. You're doing great, man. It's good to have you here. It's good to have you here. Oh, you're great.
Thanks, man.
Super. So, John.
Is this on? Yeah. God, I love the sparks. It's cool. It's really cool to see that.
Cool.
It's competing worldviews.
Yeah.
sustainability and the growth that you talk about, if that is our core problem, as Charles Eisenstein would say in his book, Sacred Economics, is that we're addicted to this growth thing, that it's not sustainable. We all know it's not sustainable from a planetary viewpoint, you know. Where do you stand there with, and the strip mining a community, I mean the Medicare stuff, where it's never gonna work when we don't, because of the nature of monetization of those real human needs. And, you know, going back to community it's a whole different ballgame. It's like second tier, third tier kind of thinking. I think what I'm hearing here is first tier kind of back and forth. And I wonder about that whole addiction to growth that our culture has, Republican or Democrat or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, you could say, the question of our day.
It is indeed.
It's the question of our day. And I will tell you that climate change issues with the burning of carbon has completely changed the game. Because people have always been saying that we're running out of resources. Back from Malthus, you know, every decade there's the new report about how we're going to run out of resources. But we get better at finding them. And so we don't have resource issues, right? We have more oil now than we've ever had, because we keep finding better and better ways of getting it. It might be that we grow our way out of that, but once you add carbon in the atmosphere into the equation, that becomes a real issue. Now, I think the climate science is far more complex than most people pretend that it is. It's far more complex. When you get into reading the IPCC and you actually read the documents that they're dealing with, it's incredibly complex, but it just stands to reason that the more carbon we put into the atmosphere, the worse that problem's going to get. And so we can't even just grow our way out of the problem, right? As we have with all of the other shortages that we've had, we just grown our way out of them. We find better ways of getting them, right? We still have copper, we still have zinc, we still have all the things that were scarce 40 years ago that we thought we were going to run out of. We have more of it now than ever because we've got better ways of getting it. But how do we grow out of it? So, yeah. I mean, you said in your thing that when we monetize needs, that's a problem. Well,
Well, it's
that-
also,
that
I mean,
raises-
it
that
was a
raises
great
a lo-
solution in its day.
That raises a lot of challenges because everything is a need, right? The person in poverty today, right, lives a 10 times better lifestyle than the person of average income 100 years ago in the United States.
Yeah, that's
Right?
true.
We have raised our standard for what poverty is in ways that are just amazing. But with the question of sustainability, we're going to have to deal with that. Is government an effective way of dealing with that?
Of course.
And you say of course, and I'm asking the question.
Well, what
I'm
else?
saying that
I
I'm
mean,
saying
we
that
need a collective dimension.
Yeah. Are there any other collective forces in our society other than government? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, there's
totally.
groups, there's religions, there's the NAACP, there's
You just
PETA,
see its
there's-
safety net sort of creating a sort of a web among free people and
that's what free people do. Right? The
self-organizing.
government did not create our society. Free people
Well, the
created.
government just is. I mean, it's, you know.
The government of 100 years ago did not have the power today. To say that it just is,
No.
in my perspective, that levels out the thing that's really of
But there was
interest,
so
which is
many
how
other
much power.
dimensions of, I mean, government, you know, they were coming from a
It-
position where the king ruled.
Not in 1900. So one of the questions.
Yeah, but we had, you know, child labor, we had, you know, slavery.
We had always had
Jim
child
Crow,
labor. We had always had
we had
slavery. It wasn't
old
until
ladies dying. alone?
It took time for us to become so wealthy that we did not need to have our children work. Throughout human history, children have worked.
Of course.
In the 20th century, we finally got wealthy enough in the wealthy countries, only in the wealthy countries, that children no longer needed to work.
Well, but the government came
That
in
was
and
in the-
stopped that before it became economically unfeasible. I mean, there was, the child labor
So
laws happened for a
that is
reason.
a statement that you're making that I question the accuracy of. You're
Well,
saying-
I
you're
mean,
saying
they
that is-
stopped it while it was still going on. I guess just by definition, it
But
was still
if,
going on until they stopped it. And
But if-
that's the
if the
legitimate.
trend-
I mean, I think, Mark, actually, I would just say
Yeah.
that this is the crux of maybe you and I are one of the differences in our worldview, and God bless us both. I'm not trying to convert you, but that there is a legitimate unity that has to be. It's just sort of fundamental.
Absolutely, I agree with you completely. The question is, what is that unity going to be?
Well, and
It's
it
not that
is
whether or
to
not
some
it's-
degree made out of force.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The question is,
To what degree?
where do we use force, and
I
what are
think,
the impacts of that, and are we asking that
as we
question?
progress, less and less force, and that has been the trajectory of human history. So I think you're hitting your cheek. Sorry. Well, shall we, Robert? Why don't you
Yeah, this
chime
is
in here, man?
fun. This is like my style of crossfire, or
Yeah,
whatever those
indeed.
politics shows. I've never seen so much interrupting happening in the Integral Center before. My question is, do y'all feel understood by each other?
That's a good question. Do I feel, I don't feel like I understand Mark. I mean, I have explanations for you.
Thank you.
I think that I think you articulate an aspect of reality, and I think you're missing a piece of reality. But then again, that's the difference in our worldviews. And that's interesting. So what is that part that is unfeelable or unfelt in each other? It's kind of a tension, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess it's just being in this room and the context that I typically live in this room on the practice of getting each other's worldviews. Like that's the core practice of the Integral Center.
Right
And
on.
so it's just part of this conversation. I'm just wondering is there a context, like what is the context of this conversation? And could we add in working towards understanding each other?
Yeah. Would you want to take a stab at that? What is the context of this conversation?
Well, the context I was attempting to set is an investigation of the difference between persuasion and force, and what's the impact that has on our society, and how do we want to deal with the fact that that's an important fact. So that's kind of you could say, the conversation I've been working within. One thing that, because we've sort of polarized to pull out the clarity of each of our positions, I'll go over, you could say, onto your side for a moment.
Cool.
And say that we care about each other. We have compassion for one another. And the more we recognize our own value, the more I recognize the preciousness of my own thoughts and feelings and honor them. Like, I'm actually feeling this. That matters to me. I care about this. And I want to do that. The more I give myself permission to that, I believe, the more I recognize that in other people. So the more I say, wow, you have the same thoughts and feelings and desires, and I want to respect you just like you respect me. And I want to thrive, and I want you to thrive. How do I make you thrive? How can we work together to thrive? And so the question is, how do we thrive? How do we work together so that we as a society facilitate people moving up the spiral? And,
Well put,
and,
man.
and with that as the fundamental question, and I hear you keep coming back to that, well, how do you do that? And from my perspective, I'll speak integral for a moment. At the postmodern perspective, at the green perspective, we can see multiple realities. We can say, oh, you think that? That's valuable. Different than what I was thinking, but valuable. Oh, you think that? That's valuable. It's different than what I was thinking, but valuable. So at this level, we start to recognize that each person has their own world. And that world has its own congruence, its own integrity. And it's beautiful. You know, it's like a culture. A culture has an expression in its laws and in its music and in its dance and in its religions and in its institutions. And it's beautiful in its uniqueness. It's deep and profound and beautiful. I want to honor that and create a system and move towards a system where each person can bring their unique gifts. And I believe that the freer we are in society, the more we can do that. The more I can find ways of creatively trading. I mean, for example, fortunately, from my perspective, the coaching profession is not yet licensed by the state. Right now, the coaching profession is not yet licensed by the state. And what that means is that people like you and I can, without any permission from the state, we don't need to be certified by them, we don't need to pay them fees, we don't need to only do the kind of work that they think is good. We can go work with any individual or any company and say, I have an idea that can make you more money. I have an idea that can create greater culture in your organization. I will bring my expertise, you pay me money. And we're free to do that. This gets back to your question of having a whole bunch of independent decisions, creating things rather than a central, right? Because when a government tries to make things happen, it's such a blunt instrument. And
Okay.
And when individuals do it, it's a very precise instrument.
Yeah.
Because I can make a separate transaction with you, a separate transaction with you, a separate transaction with you. I can trade my jacket with you. I can trade my ideas with you. I can trade my car with you. And every...
what I would say, Mark, is that is so happening.
Of
with
course.
Government in place. I mean,
of course,
when you look at the freedom that the individual sovereign unit has to self-organize in this world versus 5 years ago, much less 25 years ago and 50 years ago, and then forget that. I mean, we have infinite capacities now and capabilities for doing that in the system that continues to actually grow in terms of the public sector.
So I would say that the bulk of the freedoms that we now have, the opportunities we have, were created on the private market, right? It was individuals who created these companies that brought Google, that brought Facebook, that bought Twitter.
And it's the government who creates the highways and the militaries and the police.
And highways, militaries,
yes,
police.
Yes.
Each of those has an argument. Each of those is a persuasion.
And also
the government should do
clearing of the streets of old ladies. I mean, that's still a problem. It is. I mean, it just, I mean, and what I'm saying really is just that what you're talking about is, I think you're actually an engine for progress and development. I mean, because it's going to continue, and it is continuing to be in many ways what you're talking about, and that is just freedom, man, just liberty to free associate. And I know the difference between coaching that's regulated and coaching that isn't, but at some point, don't you want something that is, I mean, you're saying that would happen on its own.
Yeah. Do I want something that helps people differentiate between legitimate coaches and con artists? Yes. What is that? Reputation.
Yeah.
Reputation.
Okay.
Like, for example, before they licensed stock traders, right? Who would you invest your money with? Someone you trusted and who had a long reputation. So if you work for 20 years in the field of trading and you have a great reputation for honesty and integrity and intelligence and good bookkeeping, you become incredibly valuable and more people want to give you their business because they can trust you. Once you create a license, my license is as good as your license. I'm licensed. you're licensed.
There's
All
a
of-
certain new set of problems that comes with
There's
that.
a new set of problems,
Yeah.
and that's
But
always the
it seems to
question.
be,
There
you know-
are no solutions, there are only trade-offs.
Yeah,
And the key is to actually, or the thing that I would like to communicate is to actually get to examine the trade-offs rather than just the rhetoric. Not just, we want to do this because it's going to make a difference, but will it actually do it, and did it actually do it?
Cool. So, is it Ed? Yeah,
You're good.
Thank you.
welcome, Ed.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned the collapse of the banking system. Would you explain how that would have happened had Glass-Steagall not been rescinded?
So this is part of the challenge. The problem with the banking system was actually not a result of Glass-Steagall. There were other things.
What is Glass-Steagall?
Glass-Steagall was a regulation that was in place. When did it change? In the 80s? Yeah. That said that if you're a bank, you either have to be an investment bank, right, or a commercial bank.
Right.
You can't
Do both.
You can't do both.
Right.
That actually wasn't the challenge. The challenge was the derivatives and the fact that mortgages were cleared through a central authority. Right? You had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which changed the market around mortgages. So instead of saying, okay, I'm only going to let you buy a house if you have sufficient collateral. You need to put 20% down, and you need to have a certain income. You need to prove it over the course of a certain amount of years. Right? Those were the, as a bank, I only want to make loans that are going to be paid back. Right? But through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they set up a clearinghouse so that if a bank makes a loan, instead of holding the loan, they sell the loan to the third party. And that created incentive for the banks to sell mortgages because they made all the money, but they didn't have to deal with the risk because the risk was transferred elsewhere. You take that, and then you take derivatives, which multiply the effects of that. And all of those derivatives were legal. They were all fit within the regulations. In fact, they leveraged the regulations. Because that law was in place, we can do this, and we can do it literally 1,000 times. We can take our leverage and bring it up 1,000 times because that law tells us that we can do it. And another challenge with individual decisions versus collective decisions or a government decision, governments change very slowly. They tend to grow. Laws rarely go away. They increase. So we create a law. It creates a whole set of systemic problems. So then we create more laws to deal with the systemic problems, and people leverage them. And you get entire industries that are built just about leveraging the laws to get quick profit that you can't get in a free market. And so I think a more interesting question, or a question that I'm more interested in, I apologize for that. If the government was not incenting mortgages, if they were not running Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, if they were not setting up the laws that they set up in the financial system, could it have leveraged so high? Would the free market, would people have invested in something if they didn't think that the government was going to come in and save them like they had in the 3 previous decades? And if you guys are interested, there's an excellent piece by Russell Roberts, an economist, called "Gambling with Other People's Money." And if you really want to understand the incentives that existed in the financial industry that had them do what they do, it's "Gambling with Other People's Money" with Russ Roberts. Because human beings will always respond to incentives. If you say, if you do A, you'll make $500, but if you do B, you'll make $5,000. Which one would you choose? Right? You're going to choose the $5,000. If you choose the $5,000, you're doing this and not that, and that has a long-term consequence. When we set bureaucratic regulations in place, they tend to build through time and entire industries grow around them. In the free market, If someone does something that's not cool, if they do something that's not safe, Enron, for example, all the people who invested in Enron lost money. If you didn't invest in Enron, you didn't lose money.
You know, Mark, I feel like you sort of tell the story of what's wrong, which there's no end to that story. And the solution being, let's get rid of it. I mean, there's actually, if you look at, you know, the way we muddle forward, look at the world that we've created. Just with, you know, with a growing public sector that's taking care of people in a way that is unprecedented.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I'll take the deal.
And there are legitimate authors who say, and who offer statistics, who measure what happened and said, in some ways it's gotten better, but in other areas it's gotten much, much worse.
And what are you going to do with, what are you going to do with the world? Let me just continue my challenge a bit.
Sure.
What are you going to do with a world where there's, you know, no need for labor in the way that we think of labor? You know, that people there's just no need because there's an abundant, I mean, there's a point. And this is where I think the collective will come in
because
handy.
We're human beings.
Where
there will always be scarcity.
Yeah, where a free market creates an imbalance in society that just doesn't feel right. And you know, I know there's exactly
an imbalance that doesn't feel right to enough people that they persuade people to create force to stop it.
No, they
That's
force
what
them.
we're talking about.
No, we force them.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm just saying, don't back away from that.
No,
if
I
you're going to
don't.
use force, own it.
I do.
Right?
I do. I mean, I think that it's a legitimate part of life, and it's a legitimate part of the 4 quadrants of life. I mean, is that...
I agree completely. We're going to use force. What I would like to add to the political conversation, what I would like to have the integral community add to the conversation is what are the impacts of force? What happens when you add
Well,
force
again,
to
I
the
think you
equation?
have a really, you know, precise and accurate story of a lot of the wrong turns we've taken. I
So
think
do we
you're
want to learn from those?
undervaluing...
Do we want to learn from those?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Is it
I
possible?
think we actually are, and you know,
is it possible?
you're doing your share.
Is it possible that one of the learnings, right?
Yes.
Is it possible that one of the learnings is that government creates more problems than it solves
No.
when it enters into this? Right. Okay,
No.
great. If that's
I
not a
would say
possible
it's-
solution, that
Well,
clarifies the
I would just...
conversation.
Well, yeah, maybe it does. I mean, in the sense that when I look at the collective sector, I think that it's solved more problems than it's created, as the evolution of all quadrants.
Okay, so if that is a stance that you take, and that's essentially not
And we've actually
questionable,
created,
then
through evolution,
it
an
lays out the conversation.
unprecedented capacity for agency. I mean, there was no capacity for agency. And now we have
Did
enormous
government do that?
capacity. No, we did. We, as
What did-
evolving
if-
as 4 quadrant beings, we did it. We did it.
So actually, so if government didn't do that,
Well, government's
What
not an
did?
it. Government is it's part of the whole, system. I mean, it's just, the collective is a dimension of reality.
sure, do you differentiate between decisions made by free individuals and decisions made under compulsion? Do you-
Yes, yes, of
Okay,
course.
so how does that fit into, so we were down there and we've grown.
Yes,
And it's extraordinary, and what an extraordinary time to be alive.
yes.
And what a great country to be alive in,
Yep.
with the choices that we have, that we get to come here tonight and have this conversation. I agree, it's a gift.
Amazing.
It's a gift that I am not confident or arrogant enough to ask for. Like, I would not be bold enough to ask to live in such an amazing world as this. If I were talking with God and said, hey, I want life, well, what do you want? I wouldn't be bold enough to ask for something this beautiful. Like, it's,
Well
the
put, man.
the world we're in is extraordinary. The question is, how did it get built? And is there a difference between the things that got built by free people choosing to interact with one another?
Well,
with
how
all
it
the
got built was
benefits-
how it got built. I mean, it was a fucking mess. I mean, it's an evolving mess. It's a...
in that mess, here's the question I have.
In that mess, we continue to move towards goodness, truth, and beauty.
And is there an...
And the
is there an-
collective is a legitimate dimension of
Of
that.
of course it
And-
is.
And it moves in a whole. It doesn't just ask for people's, it's not voluntary.
Okay.
It's not voluntary.
Was anything that has been created voluntary versus not voluntary? Is that a distinction?
Yes,
that
it's
makes
a very
a
important,
difference?
it's a crucial distinction.
So
But they
in-
both have to be online. They
And-
both
and-
have
and does
the
the
legitimate,
Okay.
claim of reality.
Absolutely. Is there an appropriate balance between them? Or does it just, they
Yes.
both have to be there?
Well, they
So
both
what-
have to be
so
there.
how
I
do
mean,
you-
maybe at some
how do
point
you
we.
understand the balance of it? If it were 90% collective decisions enforced at the point of a gun versus 10%?
Well, I think
or
we
50-50
muddle our way
would-
forward. I mean, and
Well,
we
so-
are,
Well,
actually.
So you asked me earlier, what do you think the ideal situation is, or how would you like to change things?
Right.
I would like to change things so that our politicians are accountable.
Well,
that we-
okay,
that-
so
that we
how?
grow-
I mean,
that-
do we,
that
pull out their
we-
fingernails? I mean,
That we as voters.
they are accountable every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years.
Right.
They are.
Think about that in terms of
And
accountability.
everybody has a
W-
blog,
if-
and everybody's
if-
in the game, and, I mean, we do our best. We muddle forward.
Okay, so,
Jason, do you have a question?
sure.
May we? Yes.
So this is from Jason Lang
Oh,
from
cool.
California.
Hey, Jason.
So Jason asked, does Mark think the government is separate from us? He goes on to say, it feels like the government is being labeled as this big other that we have no power over. And now we're on a slight time delay, so he might respond, but he hasn't even probably heard that yet.
Okay, great. So I'm saying that the government as such doesn't really exist. There are individuals in positions of power who are making choices according to incentives.
According to what?
Incentives.
Okay.
There's a set of laws in place which say what we can and cannot do. That if you do them, and you're not supposed to do them, you'll go to jail, you'll get fined, people will come after you using force.
Yeah, like beating your wife.
Like beating your wife.
Yeah.
And how many people are in favor of having laws against beating your wife? How about beating your neighbor? Beating children? Great. I think we can get agreement on beating whether or not you should beat your wife.
Yeah.
Right?
We're good there.
I think the question that we need to ask is, should we have a law that allows only people with a certain net worth to invest in corporations? If it beats the earth?
If
Yeah.
it beats the earth or the
Just-
collective
John,
body of
John,
life.
start over.
Yeah, there should be a law if, those things that beat the earth, our mother. Again, I'll go back to Charles Eisenstein. He says, our job now is to grow up and stop this addiction to growth and not look at the earth as our mother, but as a lover, in that it's not something we get from all the time, and that it's oil and the atmosphere and all that just for us to use, but for us to actually become in a loving relationship with it, re-sacralize our monetary system. A whole different ballgame.
Yeah. And again, how many people agree with that? That we should bring the sacred element to money in our economy?
Me.
Absolutely. Who would be against that? The question is, how do you do that? Do you do that through persuasion, or do you do
We're
that through
doing that.
force? So that's a proposal. When we make proposals, do we know if they're going to work, and do we test the results? So again, it keeps
No.
coming back to, I'm not promoting a particular policy. I'm not saying Democrats are right or Republicans are right, or the Democrats are wrong or Republicans are wrong. I'm asking a deeper question, which is, when we get outside of the quarter, when we get outside of Democrats versus Republicans, how do we want to interact with one another?
God bless
And
those
wh-
poor
and-
people.
And what
Carrying our karmas into the arena. I mean, good
do
God.
we want them to carry our
should
karma
get on our
into the arena?
knees.
Do we want that? Right now, we inherit
Well,
that.
I mean,
I personally,
in
Personally,
a
I
perfect
do
world,
not
maybe
want
not,
that.
but thank God we can't, think one through. We have to, we emerge. We
And we can go in a different, we can go in a direction if there's a percentage of,
Okay.
to answer the question of government, there are laws that limit our behavior. And there are people in positions of power
Yes.
who use that power for their own ends.
Well, I mean, less and less. I mean, we just have more and more transparency around that. But let me just,
Okay.
sir,
I
had
will
your
say
hand up
that
for a while.
I have a more
With the
cynical
white-
view of
with the white
politics
shirt?
than you do.
Yeah, because he's had his hand up for a while. Sorry.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. My name's Tim. This kind of highlights an interesting perspective in politics that I kind of enjoy seeing, and it's that the self-image of the different political persuasions are often quite different than their actual belief systems. It seems to me that socialists, such as myself, often think of themselves as people who care more about people, and that conservatives and even libertarians are the callous, cold ones who don't. But it seems that their perspectives on human nature are different. And I guess the question that I would ask, particularly of you, Mark, because you're representing the libertarian disposition, is that given the removal of all force, and given everybody from the billionaire who makes money off of putting lead on children's toys because it's cheaper to the desperate person in the street who would break into your car and steal your stuff, removal of all force and only leaving persuasion and incentive, would the overwhelming disposition of people be to care about society and each other? Or would force be necessary in that idealized situation?
Or if somebody's just unpleasant enough that nobody wants to take care of them.
So if that were happening and people were the same as they were before it happened, right? So we've got everybody in the world is exactly how they are, right? They're exactly how they are. They can't be any more how they are than they are, right? The things they care about, the things they think are important, the things they think are legitimate or not legitimate to do, they are how they are. If we take away all laws, a large percentage of people will just take other people's stuff.
Well,
right?
you're not saying we should take away all laws. Are you just
No,
saying
no.
as a
So
thought experiment,
your
right?
ideal. So I think that what would happen is if you removed all laws, people would start banding together to form laws. They would start putting laws back in place. They would probably be worse than the ones we have, because the ones we have were grown by natural selection over the course of thousands of years. We could say that the 20th century is the biggest experiment, or the 19th century, the 1800s were the big experiment in human history, where we, for the first time, had a society where the laws had people be free, with some major exceptions, women, slaves, let's not forget those. But within the context, human beings were free in the United States in the 19th century in a way that they had never been free before. Right? The only real laws that were in place protected your person and your property and protected you against fraud. There was no government safety net. There was no centralized, there were tons of people who got together and solved local problems.
And there were
And
people
that's-
who were
and that's-
left, there were abject situations of,
Yes.
people who were homeless and
Yes.
destitute.
And are there people in absolutely abject situations today that are homeless and destitute? Yes.
Not like then, no. Children, no. Not. It's not.
Okay.
No, come on. I mean,
I'm not
there was
arguing,
the
in
old
the United
lady-
States, I'm not arguing that.
Okay.
So I
I
agree
mean,
with
my
you.
grandparents knew some of them. I mean, just died in their homes. I mean, just horrible. I mean, we just wouldn't stand it. And this was at a community. Come on.
Okay. But we did let it happen.
Yes. Until we grew into, a more modern society that's just
With
more
more
like,
technology
instead of
and more wealth.
Instead of let's take our chances and hope for the best and all self-organize, because we know that there's a serious and significant imperfection to that. Let's just continue. It's not even that we make that decision. It's just that we grow into, we don't want to see that. Our moral development grows, and that's the growth of the collective.
Right,
the collective grows, man.
I'm not doubting that, right?
Okay, I know.
Right?
Okay.
What I'm saying is,
It grows, and you see a different sort of physics of growth.
Yes. As it grows, the more wealth we have, the better we treat our children. Right? There are governments in India, there are places all around the world where they don't have wealth, but they do have lots of government programs. And their children live much, much worse than ours.
Who's this?
India, China, I mean...
our children live much better because we have far better programs.
Okay. I'm saying
And
there
we're
are
all more
countries that have
civilized,
much
too.
better programs, they just don't have the wealth, they don't have the trust in one another.
Who's this now? Who has better programs? India?
Yes.
Has better children?
Childhood
programs?
If we look at their laws, what they're supposed to be doing, they don't do it because they don't have the wealth. But what they're trying
may have some, they have a modern strata that, pretends to think things through, and they do. But no, I mean, the culture of India, the children, you don't want to be a child in India.
It is not the laws that make the United States a great place to live.
It's partly that.
It's partly that.
Yes.
But there are other places.
Including, the collective, which says you can't do that to a child. And not only because we're going to self-organize and go take care of it. I mean, that's good too. But this is how we self-organize and take care of it. So that there's actually no exceptions.
One way to
self-organize. Or, at least a better, more intelligent system. Okay. Okay.
So just one way of organizing that is through government.
Yes.
Absolutely.
One of, it's an important one.
Yeah,
it's the public sector.
And I'm talking about the other ones.
Fair enough, but you want to deny the legitimacy of the
I want to
my category.
I want to question the impact and the effectiveness of what the government does.
Okay, good. Thumbs up on the government.
Great, and that's what I've been trying to do
Big
all
time.
night.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just asked the question because it sounded like you were being pushed towards a fundamentalist point of view, and you're not presenting that. You're presenting a nuanced point of view. And I think what you're saying is that as we evolve up our chart, that we need less force and we're going to be more responsive to persuasion.
I think that's true. I agree with that.
I agree with that, but I think it's something deeper than that. It's that once you add force into the equation, it fundamentally changes the nature of the game.
Force is in the equation. I mean, it just is. I mean, you
okay,
want to
okay. So can I rephrase?
I want to get rid of,
can I rephrase?
Manure.
Can I rephrase?
Yeah.
Okay. When you add more force to a system, with each increment
we have actually
of force,
less and less force. I mean,
we might, but if we were to add more force by adding a new law,
we're all very compliant with these things.
It's getting really hard to understand you guys when you keep talking over each other.
Okay.
My listening is deteriorating rapidly,
okay.
And I'm totally interested.
Tell us what you're thinking.
I was really enjoying the point, but it's hard, because of the audio system, when you interject when Mark's talking, it just it's really hard to mentally even follow. So it'd be really helpful to get the nuggets that you both have if there was a little more honor in the conversation.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Bio break.
5 minutes.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Cool, man. You're doing good. You enjoying this? We moving the ball?